Hello there, or hello again, if you were briefly tuned in before we had a technological interruption. I'm Michelle DiMarzo, Curator of Education and Academic Engagement at the Fairfield University Art Museum. Welcome again to the next event in our Spring 2022 Art in Focus series, as we're going to look together at this silkscreen print from 2015 by the Chinese artist Luo Biwu entitled Parts. This print is currently on view in our Walsh Gallery at Fairfield. And it's in a show called Seeing is Believing. And I think my wonderful producer, Jesse, is going to drop that link into the chat right now if you'd like to take a look at the website. This show is only open through March 5th, and it's fantastic. It's on view together with another show of also contemporary Chinese art, Ink Stone, in our Walsh Gallery. If you're in the area, come by. We're open, free to the public, Tuesday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. If you are not in the area and you want to get a sense of what the show's about, you can visit the website, you can take a 3D Matterport virtual tour of the show, and you can play a little scavenger hunt with yourself and see if you can find Luo Biwu's print, which we next Thursday are going to be looking at together in person. So if you are in the area and you want to come to the Walsh Gallery on the 17th at 11 a.m., we're going to be talking about this piece together in person, together with some of the other awesome artwork that's on view in Seeing is Believing. But this I chose, I don't have a scale image, I apologize to say, but it's a pretty large screen print. I would estimate it's about 3 feet across and 2 feet high. Most of the prints that Luo Biwu sent to the show are all similarly large scale. And I was drawn to all of his prints for the interesting sort of ambiguous imagery and color within them. So in thinking about, well, if we wanted to do an art and focus event focused around this special exhibition, Seeing is Believing, which one would I pick? This is the one that I chose. Since Luo Biwu is a Chinese artist, Luo is his family name and Biwu is his personal name. So if you hear me referring to him as Luo, I'm referring to him by his family name. He's one of 5 artists whose work is on view in this exhibition. And all of the works that he sent are screen prints. So if you're unfamiliar with the silkscreen process, that is something that is used across a wide range of production, everything from making t-shirts and tote bags to making fine art prints like this one. And really what it involves is forcing ink through a very, very fine silk screen. Really, it's mesh, it's not really silk, on which various stencils can be applied to block ink from entering onto whatever the substrate is, whether it's the canvas of a tote bag, or in this case, a very large sheet of printing paper. And you can layer those designs on top of each other in multiple colors, and you can produce something as wonderfully complex and layered as the print that we are looking at here together. So I thought, and to help us sort of look around the different elements of this print, that I would break it down into details to kind of help our eye move around. So I'll go to the first one. Oh, sorry, this is just the print reaching full screen. But at the top, you see I've isolated and sort of blown up the upper register of the print. And at lower left, I have the print as a whole, so we can keep a sense of where we are in the overall composition. So what do we see at the top of this image? Like I said before, screen printing allows you to really work in layers. So if we think about what we might perceive as the layer that is furthest away from us or sort of underneath, I'm seeing lots of sort of abstract markings that make me think of ink or paint that has been rubbed or spilled onto a surface in this sort of dark lavender color. And then superimposed on top of that, I'm seeing images of people. And as your eye follows, and if we're going to follow how reading operates in the East Asian world, we would start from right and move to left. So I'm looking to the right first, and I see what seems to be a family photo. And even though it's screen printed, I recognize that I'm looking at sort of the ghostly image of a photograph. I see a man at the center. He's seated. He has a baby on his knee. I see that he looks like he might be wearing a suit, maybe with a tie. I see some what look like nice leather shoes he's wearing. And there are children around him. So he has one child on his knee. On the right, I see 2 girls, slightly differing ages, both wearing what seem to be dresses of a matching fabric. And on the left, I see a little boy standing closest to the baby that's on this guy's knee, and a taller girl behind him, seemingly wearing a dress of the same fabric as the 2 other girls on the other side. So that's where my eye starts, on the right. And vision is in many ways a it's a cultural construction. We are taught in the West, we sort of start left and move right. That's how we read. But if we're looking at a product of an East Asian society like this one, I would start on the right, as I have here. And if we start there and we move left, what happens to this family photograph, this family grouping? It starts to disintegrate or be cut up. And on the previous screen, or on the first screen I showed, the title of this artwork is Parts. And I think it's immediately apparent why he might have given such a title to this artwork, because he takes that family photograph, and what do we have? First, we have the two little girls together. We have the three children on the other side, the father cut out of the center. Moving a little bit further, we see the boy and the girl from the left alone. Then moving further to the left, the boy, the girl on the left, and the baby, still no father. The two girls on the right alone. The father isolated and alone without his children. Once again, the children on the left. And finally, the last grouping furthest to the left, the older girl, the boy, the baby, the father, but not the little girls on the other side. So this, you want to call it almost a pattern, but it isn't really, because the only ones that really repeat are the two older girls. But even they, if you look to the, you can see my mouse, you look to the first two girls and they appear isolated here, and they appear again here. It's not exactly the same. The shorter girl's been sort of bisected. She's been cut off a little bit. There's not quite a sense of a perfect repetition of a pattern, but there is a sense of this family unit that we see on the right, which does not appear to include a mother or any older members of the family, just the father and these five children, getting broken apart and recombined in these other groupings across that top register. And beneath them, we have this sort of purplish field, but I'm also seeing sort of an orangey, sort of jagged border underlying them. So that's the top register as I'm looking at this print. Keeping to this idea of starting from the right and moving left, I'm going to move down to this rectangular field on the right side of the print. And by now we recognize these familiar faces, right? It's the members of this family, once again, cut, fragmented into these different parts and laid out almost like they're pasted into an album. Since here we don't see the same family members appearing more than once, just the father at the top of almost what seems to be a pyramid. Children below, separated from each other, the father above. And I should say that one of the things that's been kind of puzzling me, and maybe you'll have some ideas about as I look at this print, is that I don't know what these other shapes are. And they appear in the top register, these sort of brownish, purplish fields. They repeat. They're the same sort of two that are repeated both in this field and in others throughout the print. And I'm not quite sure where they come from and what part, pardon the pun, what part they play in this composition. So if you have ideas of going forward of what those other insertions might mean, I would really love to hear your ideas. So that's the piece we have over here on the right. Oh, someone already has the answer. They said they are the negative spaces on either side of the father's head. Oh, that's good. Now I have to go back to the image where I can see, oops, wrong way. Let's go back. Oh, you're so right. And Jesse, if you could put whoever's name that was in the chat, since I'm not looking. Oh, sorry, that was Jesse. That was our producer. Okay, so that's a great example of the kind of collaborative looking that is valuable to us. I have been staring at this print, well, since the first time I saw it, which was months ago, deciding that this is going to be the art in focus. I've looked at it in person, and every time I thought, I wonder what those shapes are. And it took another person looking at the same object to point out what probably seemed to Jesse to be obvious. Negative space. Thank you so much for that. So now I can tuck that away and know what that is. Of course, I suppose the follow-up would be not just to Jesse, but to anyone else. Why the negative space? Why cut that out, give it its own color, and give it such a prominent place in this composition? As you'll see, it gets repeated even more in some of the other sections. I will admit, though, that what actually drew me to choose this print as opposed to any of the others, well, it's two things. Partially it was the color. I was drawn to this sort of purplish mauve color scheme that is throughout, which is distinct from the other artworks by Luo that we have on view in this exhibition. And what also drew me in was the sense that these structures, these shapes that are, especially in the central area, they're overlaid on what we can now recognize are the silhouettes of the family, the father and the children. And really, I should have been able to figure out that negative space thing, because as I look at this, the negative space pieces have been colored in sort of a dusky orange yellow. So I really should have been able to put that together. Go art historian. But it's the rectilinear shapes mixed with circles that are overlaid onto their sort of absent bodies in the center. That put me in mind of architectural ground plans, as you might see, to get the sense of the ground plan of St. Peter's Cathedral or of a ancient Roman necropolis at Pompeii. So that really struck me. It's like I could understand, following this family photograph that has been cut to pieces. But then it added this question of, well, what is that structure, or what are these structures? Are they actually structures? Am I actually looking at a ground plan, or am I just interpreting that in something that is more familiar to me with my background in art history? I don't know. I will look forward to hearing your thoughts on the subject. And then over on the right, a piece that I didn't blow up to fill the full screen, you see those negative spaces have been repeated now a lot in sort of almost a formation. There are two white ones in the center, and then on either side, repeated multiply over and over and over. At the bottom, we again have the family grouping, again cut up, recombined. You'll notice at the lower right of this square, now the girls have been doubled. So it's the same two girls from the right side of the original image, but repeated and flipped on the left to make a group of 4 girls where there were only 2 before. The father and child on his knee, and then the girls again. So in this grouping on the left, those other 2 children, the taller girl and the boy that are originally on his left side from our perspective, now they're gone. And superimposed quite clearly, because there's only one superimposition here, a ground plan, something that seems to me like a ground plan over all of them. And when I say seems to me like a ground plan, one of the things that struck me in looking at all of these, typically you expect to see, I'll bring up the full image, a ground plan would have perforations for doors. I mean, maybe not windows, maybe there you would just sort of have slightly more indentations in the width of the wall, but there are no entries or exits if in fact these are the ground plans of buildings. So that made me doubt whether I'm interpreting that correctly. Or it also occurred to me, these could be, very fanciful ideas of ground plans where he has just imaginatively removed a door and access. And certainly there's lots of strange negative spaces inside those ground plans. I'm just going to highlight some of them with my mouse that don't actually fit what we would expect to find in the ground plan of any sort of building. So some of these larger spaces make sense as potentially chambers, as rooms. Some of them seem like they might lead to each other, but then many of them are just disconnected negative spaces. So how are we meant to put that together? We have a family photograph torn apart and recombined in many different ways on the surface of this print. We have what we now recognize as the negative space from that photograph, and otherwise you could say sort of meaningless shape, given a lot of purpose and a lot of weight over the course of this whole composition. And then you have this other element, whether it's a ground plan or some other arrangement of shapes superimposed over the family. What is that? What do we take that to mean? And of course, the challenge and the ambiguity of contemporary art is that there is not always a clear definition, a clear answer to what a particular artwork might mean. But that also means it does leave a lot of freedom for how we might associate, what we might associate with what we're looking at. So if you have any ideas or you have any associations that are coming to mind as we look at this print, please feel free to drop them into the chat. I would love to hear the ideas that you may have. I will say that one of the things that had originally struck me as I was looking at this print, focusing on that family, knowing that Luo is a practicing artist, he is, I think, in his mid-50s, and I wondered if perhaps he was one of the children, one of perhaps the little boy standing to the left, maybe the baby, if it's a boy being sort of dandled on his father's knee. That was one of the thoughts I had. Is this him drawing on his own family history, a photograph of his family? Maybe this is some reference to a separation of his family that had taken place. However, in the case of Luo, who I have not personally met, but we have been fortunate enough to have some wonderful videos that he and the other 4 Chinese artists filmed sort of in celebration of their work being at Fairfield University. And I didn't mention this, but if you had not encountered Seeing is Believing before, the secondary title is Crossings and Transpositions Part II, because Part 1 was a Fairfield University studio art professor, Joe Yarrington, and 4 other American artists who traveled to China in 2019, and their artwork was on view in Guangzhou, China. And this Part 2 is the reciprocal, these Chinese artists sending their work to be exhibited at Fairfield. In a perfect world, in a pre-pandemic world, when international travel, especially from China, was a little bit easier, the original goal and hope was to invite the Chinese artists to come and talk about their work with us in person. Unfortunately, that has not been possible. But they recorded these videos in their studios in China, and those are on view physically in the gallery on an iPad, and you can also watch them at our YouTube page or on our Watch, Listen, and Learn page on our main website, and I believe on the landing page for the show as well. And that was great because it was a little bit of a chance for me to hear from this artist directly and to see some other examples of his work. And if you check out that video that Luo filmed, one of the other projects that he's seen working on is a project that involved reusing ceramic roof tiles from what I presume to have been demolished traditional buildings. And he talks a lot about living in a rapidly industrializing society, the old and the new, and the tensions that exist between them. So he did this project of taking these old roof tiles, and he had screen printed a photograph of a family onto each one of them. All different photographs. They looked a lot like the photograph in this print. And although he didn't address in the video, and if he was here in person, I'd love to ask him, what is his source for the photographs? Where is he getting them from? It at least made me think, okay, if this is clearly something he's using broadly in his work, it may not be a one-to-one sort of biographical connection that I was instinctively trying to make. It might be just a larger theme that he's tying into about perhaps how families have changed in China in general as industrialization has proceeded. And I'll just mention in this same project where he took these traditional tiles and screen printed on them, he also made matching new tiles in stainless steel. And he commented that he was drawn to that, the old versus the new contrast. So those videos are available for you to check out if you'd like to hear from the artists more distinctly. But I will also say that if I'm looking at this print and I'm standing, I'm in Fairfield, but I'm thinking about China in the year 2022 and thinking about the issue of family separation, I will admit that what's coming to mind for me is not something that I think Luo Biwu intended, and that is I'm thinking about the Uyghurs, this minority population that is suffering an extraordinary amount of oppression from the Chinese government, in which many families are being torn apart. Children are being sent to re-education state centers. So as I said, I doubt this is anything that Luo Biwu is intending. He's making this in 2015, and he is a product of, let's say, the state-approved art school system in China. It is unlikely that he would be making any art that would be openly critical of the regime, but I don't want to suggest also that artists can't find ways, even in the most oppressive circumstances, to make their feelings known. I'm just saying that I don't think necessarily he in 2015 was putting that content in, but that's where I am as a subjective viewer in 2022. I'm looking at this and thinking about that reality that is so often in the news right now. So I don't know if any of you have any thoughts or reactions to share on this work of art. As I said, it is something you can take a peek at in the virtual tour that is on the website that is dropped into the chat box, fairfield.edu/museum/seeingisbelieving. And I hope you'll have a chance to come to Fairfield if you are local and take a look at this and the other work of these Chinese artists in person. And as always, if you have any questions or any reactions that you'd like to share just by email as opposed to by chat, you're more than welcome to do so. And my email address is mdimarzo, MDIMARZO @fairfield.edu. I hope to possibly see some of you next Thursday in the Walsh Gallery at 11 a.m. as we talk about this and other artworks in person for an in-person Art in Focus. But otherwise, I will wish everyone a wonderful rest of their day. Thanks for joining me.